everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today we've got a Ruger LC9s on the table. It's a striker-fired evolution of the original LC9, which was hammer-fired. So let's talk about this gun a little bit today. First we'll start off by showing you that it is clear. The original LC9 was often criticized for having a poor trigger. As a hammer-fired gun, it was kind of long, kind of heavy, and a lot of people didn't like it. They evolved it into the LC9s, which comes in two versions, the LC9s and the LC9s Pro. The difference between the two is that the Pro deletes the thumb safety. So this is a drop-safe weapon. It does have the split trigger like a Glock, and it does have an internal drop safety, which I'll show you when I take it apart. But there is no thumb safety. It's ready to go. The trigger operates in more of a DAO-like fashion, but it is a very, very light trigger. We measured this one. It comes in around 4 pounds. From a magazine perspective, it comes from the factory with one magazine, which is 7 round. They're steel magazines. And it comes with your choice of replaceable base plates. So the owner of this, who lent this to us, likes pinky extenders, so he put the pinky extender base plate on it. But there's also a flat base plate if you don't like the pinky extenders. It comes with both base plates in the package. As you can see, it's a very small gun. It's a very light gun. It's 17.2 ounces. It's 6 inches from front to back. It's 4.5 inches tall, and it's 0.90 inches thick. However, there is a little bit of a protrusion from the slide release that sticks out. But overall, you're looking at a relatively small, thin, and light gun. The sights are a 3-dot sight arrangement that, when I'm showing them to you here, they actually look quite clear. However, we did find when we were at the range with it, they had a tendency to gray out. Something about the way they're recessed and shaped. We found them a little bit difficult to see in varying lighting conditions. And the owner of this gun had the same issue with it. He's actually already ordered replacement fiber optic sights, plans to install them as soon as he gets it back from us. The back sight is drift adjustable, dovetailed. It does have a set screw to lock it in place. And the front sight is dovetailed, so it's replaceable, but you can see at the front there's a little pin, so it's pinned. So you can't drift adjust it, but you can pop the pin out and replace the sight. And I have a feeling that that's something that you're probably going to want to do if you have the same issues that we had with actually seeing the sights clearly when we were on the range. From a trigger perspective, let me show you this is clear. From a trigger perspective, it has a relatively long trigger. So we do the take up, but it's exceptionally light all the way back to the break. So it would actually be characterized as a nice trigger, and it's definitely nicer than the LC9 hammer-fired variant. The one difficulty we did find with this trigger is there is no distinct wall. If you're familiar with Glock triggers and many of the others, as you do the take up, you pull the trigger back, you hit a point where there's a clear wall, and then you go a little bit further and it breaks. This one, it's actually relatively vague. You don't know at what point in the cycle, as you're drawing it back, there's no discernible feel of when it's going to break. And with the trigger being very long like that, the grips being exceptionally thin and short length of pull, it's a little bit difficult to isolate that trigger finger pull from the rest of your hand and get tight groups. I'm sure that's something that can be overcome with a lot of practice, but this isn't a gun that you're going to take out of the box, run to the range with it, and start throwing 1-inch groups with it right out of the box, unless you've got existing familiarity with longer triggers like this one. Let me show you the reset on this. So take it up, break, almost all the way back out, a little bit further. So the reset on this is almost all the way back out. Very little tactile feel to it, and there's a minor click you hear when it hits the reset. So this is not designed to be a race gun. It's a concealed carry self-defense weapon, and it truly is intended to be used at shorter range. Not to say you couldn't shoot it at longer ranges, but that's not its real design intent. Overall, once we kind of got a little practice with the trigger, we were actually pulling some pretty good groups with it. Just plan, if you buy this gun, to spend a little time at the range with it to get familiar with it. So let me show you the trigger one more time before I actually go ahead and break it down. So there's your take up, break, reset almost all the way back out, and then coming off the reset there's a little bit more take up again, before you start to feel resistance, and then it breaks again. And like the Glocks and stuff like that, where I continually actually use the reset, I found it very difficult to do that with this gun. It's best to just let the trigger all the way out, plan to cycle it again. So let's go ahead and take it apart. So the first thing you need to do is confirm that it's empty, which it is, and you have to pull the trigger. And you can do that at any point in the cycle, but it's probably easiest to do it right after confirming empty, and of course remove the magazine. Then what you're going to do is there's this little slide thing here that's got a distinct, it's got a distinct click when it goes down. I'm going to push this down towards the bottom of the gun. The easiest way to do is with your thumbnail, which so of course I will be putting my thumb in the view, but I'm just going to click it down. And you'll see now that there's a pin exposed. And there's sort of a half moon shape in the slide. So you pull the slide just a hair back to line that up. And then on the other side, there's a little hole here, and you can see the pin. And I'm going to have to reach in there with like a pick or something like that and pop that pin out. So it's a bit of an acrobatic thing. You got to pull the slide back a hair, line it up, flip it over, reach in there and pop the pin down, and then the pin falls out. There's no direction to this pin. The retainment is that little slide thing, so you don't have to worry about which way it came out. And because I've already pulled the trigger, the slide will come right off it. The frame actually has full-length steel rails, front and rear. So it's actually a pretty robust, solid frame for such a little gun, and still maintaining such light weight. And the trigger group is here at the back. It's actually fairly simple in there. There's really not much going on in here. On the slide, you do have a captive recoil spring and a 3.12 inch barrel with a flare at the end. And the flare does help the lock up and theoretically improves the repeatability of your grouping. So you can see a little flare at the end. Other than that, it's a fairly conventional looking striker barrel. Well constructed, robust, smooth. There's no serrations or anything on the barrel frame itself. It's a nice, smooth, well polished barrel. And it does have a nice feed ramp. It's got a bit of a polish to it. It's not a mirror polish. And this gun does seem to feed relatively well. The owner of it says it's fed everything that he's, tried to put through it. He hasn't had any problems with it. The inside of the slide, you can see back here at the back is your drop safety, a little plunger. So it is a drop safe weapon, as I mentioned. And everything inside the slide is well machined, smooth. So overall it's a very well constructed gun. And at the price that they're going for, which is really not that very expensive, it's around $480 is the retail, and you can often find them less expensive than that. You're getting a very good quality gun at that price. Reassembly is relatively easy. Drop the barrel back in, drop the recoil spring back in, give it a little push to make sure it's centered. Slide it back on the frame, and then you just pull it back a little bit to line up the hole in the notch. You take that pin and just drop it back in there, and then push it in with your finger or pick till it bottoms out, and then flip this up, and you're back in business. So other than the need to try to poke through this little hole with a pin or a Glock disassembly tool or anything like that, that's really the only complicated piece of it, is getting through that little hole to push the pin out initially. I'm sure after a little while you might be able to just give it a whack and have the pin drop through. Now one other thing I'll show you on the grip of this that is kind of a little bit strange. It's going to be a little difficult to show you on camera, but you can see there's actually a recess, and if you look at it from the bottom, it's almost kind of like starting to go towards an hourglass shape. And with this recess, when you grab the gun, you bring your fingers around, instead of sitting flat on something like they're used to, they kind of keep going a little bit into this little recess. I think the concept is to make it easier to get a good grip on the gun. You can't go forward and back because your fingers are curled around a little bit. But it does make the grip different than you're used to. Not to say it's uncomfortable or ungainly, but it's not what you're used to, which again adds to the little bit of difficulty just picking this gun up and immediately being good with it. So they've got some ergonomics in here that are a little different than what you might be used to. Overall, the gun functioned well. It was pleasant to shoot once we kind of figured out what our grip was. As a concealed carry gun, it's really a good size, thin and light. And let me show you a couple of other guns that you might be looking at if you're looking at guns in this territory. I'll slide the magazine back into it. One of the ones you might be looking at would be the Glock 43. And additionally, when you just look at it, you might think that the Ruger is a lot smaller than the Glock 43, but it's actually not. From a thickness standpoint, the slide is actually a hair thicker, and we're talking about 1/2 of an inch here. The slide itself on the Ruger is actually a hair thicker than the Glock. Overall, when you figure frame and everything, because the Glock frame kind of protrudes out a little bit, kind of bulges out a little bit, it ends up being a few hundredths thinner than the Glock. But, you know, basically by comparison, we're talking about 1/100 of an inch. Nothing's going to make a significant difference. From a length perspective, it's just a bit shorter than the Glock in overall length when I line it up beaver tail to beaver tail. But when you compare the grips, and I will put the Glock comes with one pinky extender and one regular magazine. When you put them side by side, you'll see that they're very close. The Ruger is almost a little bit taller than the Glock. And if we take the magazines out, I don't have the flush magazine, of course, for the Ruger because the owner likes the pinky extenders. But if we put them side by side, the Glock with the flush magazine in, and you can see about where the flush magazine would sit on the Ruger, it's a hair longer from a grip perspective than the Glock 43. So it's not that there's a huge difference in size between this and some of the other competition. Now the Glock does hold 6+1, the Ruger holds 7+1. And the other one that you always might be looking at is something more of a concealed carry double stack. This one holds 10 rounds. This is a Ruger SR9C, and it holds 10 rounds. And it's not a lot shorter than that, maybe about 1/2 to 3/4 inch. You'll see the grip is a little bit shorter, and of course it's lighter and thinner. But it's not a massive difference. Now when you're trying to put this in your waistband or carry it in a pocket, a few tenths of an inch and a couple ounces can make a big difference. But it's not like this is groundbreakingly small compared to some others that are out there. But it's a good choice, especially if you do like the longer trigger, the more DAO style trigger, and want something very thin, or liked the LC9 everything except the trigger. Now you've got something that has a more conventional, smoother, and actually relatively light. Comes in around 4 pounds. So, hang on for some more range footage. If you like our videos, give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, and have a great day. Thank you.